I found the envelope wedged between my screen door and the frame when I got home from work on a Tuesday evening, the kind of official-looking thing that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside was a letter from the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association informing me that they were planning to install solar panels on every rooftop in the development and that my cooperation was expected. I read it twice, then started laughing so hard I had to sit down on my front steps. My name is Owen Whitmore, and I'm a commercial real estate attorney who specializes in property rights. 3 years ago, when I bought this townhouse in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, I did something that most people would consider either brilliant or insane, depending on their perspective. I bought the air rights above every single building in this HOA development, not just my own unit, but all 217 properties in Meadowbrook Estates. Let me explain how that happened, because it's actually a pretty interesting story. The developer who built this place back in 2019 was a guy named Marcus Chen, and he got into serious financial trouble right after completion. He'd borrowed heavily, the market shifted, and he was desperately trying to liquidate assets. Most people don't realize that air rights can be sold separately from the property itself, especially in planned developments where the original developer retained certain rights. Marcus had kept the air rights as a speculative investment, thinking he might sell them to a telecommunications company for cell towers or something similar. I happened to be representing a client in an unrelated matter when I heard through the grapevine that Marcus was selling everything he could. I contacted him directly and offered $30,000 for the air rights to the entire development. He accepted within 24 hours. My wife Sarah thought I was crazy at the time, spending that kind of money on what seemed like nothing, but I had a hunch it might be useful someday. Turns out I was right. The letter from the HOA was signed by someone named Patricia Hendricks, who identified herself as the HOA president. I'd seen her around the neighborhood, a woman in her early 50s with the kind of aggressive haircut that screams, "I demand to speak to your manager." She drove a white Mercedes SUV and had a tendency to walk around the development with a clipboard, documenting violations of the community rules. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the letter. Patricia answered on the second ring with a voice that sounded like she gargled gravel every morning. "Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. This is Patricia." "Hi, Patricia. This is Owen Whitmore from Unit 147. I just received your letter about the solar panel installation." "Oh, good. I'm glad you got it. We're very excited about this project. It's going to save everyone money on electricity and increase property values. The installation company will be contacting individual homeowners to schedule appointments starting next month." "Yeah, about that," I said, keeping my tone pleasant. "You're going to need my approval before you install anything on any of the rooftops." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, what?" "I own the air rights above every building in this development. That includes the rooftop space. Any construction or installation that extends into that airspace requires my permission." The pause was longer this time. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had taken on an edge. "That's ridiculous. Homeowners have the right to modify their own rooftops." "Actually, they don't. Not when someone else owns the air rights. I'd be happy to provide you with the documentation. I purchased those rights from the original developer 3 years ago." "That's not possible. We would have been notified. The sale was recorded with the county. It's public record. You can look it up yourself. Maricopa County Recorder's Office, document number 2022-0847-321. I heard papers rustling in the background. "This is absolutely unacceptable. You can't just block a community improvement project that benefits everyone." "I'm not blocking anything yet. I'm just saying you need my approval. Why don't we set up a meeting to discuss this? I'm reasonable." "Fine." The word came out like a gunshot. "Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. at the community center. I'm calling an emergency board meeting." "Sounds good. See you then." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat back on my couch, grinning. This was going to be entertaining. The next evening, I arrived at the community center 5 minutes early. The building was a generic single-story structure near the development's entrance with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people. Patricia was already there, along with 4 other board members, all arranged on one side of a long folding table like they were conducting a tribunal. About a dozen other residents had shown up. Probably word had spread that something interesting was happening. Patricia looked like she'd dressed for battle. She wore a burgundy pantsuit and had her arms crossed over her chest. To her right was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who introduced himself as Gerald Morrison, the board treasurer. Next to him was a younger woman named Susan Campbell, the secretary, who kept glancing nervously between Patricia and me. The other two board members were a retired couple, Tom and Linda Martinez, who mostly just looked confused. "Mr. Whitmore," Patricia began without preamble, "we've looked into your claim, and while it appears you did purchase something from the developer, we don't believe it gives you the right to interfere with homeowners' use of their own property." I pulled out a folder from my messenger bag. I brought copies of the relevant documents for everyone: the deed to the air rights, the title insurance policy, and a legal opinion I had prepared by an independent real estate attorney confirming the validity of the purchase. I distributed the papers around the table. Patricia snatched hers and began reading with a scowl that deepened with every paragraph. "This is some kind of scam," she finally said. "You're trying to extort money from the HOA. "I'm not trying to extort anyone. I'm simply asserting my property rights. You're planning to install structures in space that I own. That requires my permission." Gerald cleared his throat. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Whitmore?" "That's a good question. I'm open to discussing terms, but first I'd like to understand more about this solar panel project. Who's the contractor? What's the cost? How is this decision made?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "That information is board business." "Actually," Susan said quietly, "the meeting minutes are supposed to be available to all homeowners. We voted on the solar project at last month's meeting." "Thank you, Susan," I said. "I'd like to see those minutes." Patricia looked like she wanted to strangle her secretary, but Susan pulled out a laptop and pulled up the document. According to the minutes, the board had approved a contract with a company called Sunbright Solar Solutions for $1.2 million. Each homeowner would be charged approximately $5,500 added to their HOA dues over the next 2 years. "That seems expensive," I said. "Have you gotten competing bids?" "We did our due diligence," Patricia snapped. "Can I see the other bids?" "There weren't any. Sunbright came highly recommended." I raised an eyebrow. "You're spending over $1 million on a single bid?" Tom Martinez leaned forward. "You know, Patricia, I did ask about getting other quotes at that meeting. You said there wasn't time." "The incentive program has a deadline," Patricia said. "We had to move quickly to qualify for the federal tax credits." Something about this smelled wrong. I made a mental note to research Sunbright Solar Solutions as soon as I got home. Peace. "Look," I said, "I'm not opposed to solar panels in principle, but I'm not going to approve a project that hasn't been properly vetted. Get me at least 2 more bids from reputable contractors, and let's see if Sunbright's price is actually competitive. If it is, we can talk about terms for using the air rights." "This is blackmail," Patricia said. "No, it's negotiation. Blackmail would be if I threatened to expose something damaging about you unless you paid me. This is just standard property rights law. If you wanted to build a deck that extended onto your neighbor's property, you'd need their permission, right? Same principle." Linda Martinez nodded. "That makes sense to me." Patricia looked around the table and seemed to realize she wasn't going to get unanimous support for her outrage. "Fine. We'll get additional bids, but this is a waste of time, and you're delaying a project that would benefit the entire community. If it's truly beneficial, a few weeks of due diligence won't hurt. I'll make myself available to review any proposals you want to send over." The meeting broke up shortly after that, with several residents coming up to me afterward to quietly express support. One guy named Frank told me he'd thought the solar project seemed rushed, but didn't want to speak up against Patricia because she had a reputation for retaliating against people who opposed her. That was interesting. When I got home, I immediately started researching Sunbright Solar Solutions. Their website looked professional enough, but something felt off. The company had only been incorporated 6 months ago, and their business address was a UPS store in Scottsdale. I dug deeper, using some of the database access I had through my law firm, and found the corporate filings. The company had 3 officers listed: David Brennan, Michelle Torres, and Patricia Hendricks. Bingo. Patricia was an officer of the solar company that she'd just awarded a $1.2 million contract to without competitive bidding. That was textbook self-dealing. a breach of her fiduciary duty to the HOA, and possibly fraud. I spent the next 2 hours documenting everything I could find. Sunbright had no completed projects, no customer reviews, no track record whatsoever. It was essentially a shell company. I also found something else interesting. David Brennan was Patricia's brother-in-law. He'd been involved in 2 previous business ventures that had both gone bankrupt, leaving investors and creditors unpaid. This was bigger than I'd initially thought. Patricia wasn't just being difficult, she was running a scam. The next morning, I called an attorney I knew who specialized in HOA law. Her name was Rebecca Chen, no relation to the developer, and she'd helped me with the air rights purchase originally. "Owen, good to hear from you. How's suburban life treating you?" It just got interesting. "I've got a situation." I explained the solar panel project and what I'd discovered about Sunbright. Rebecca whistled. "That's bold. She's stealing from her own neighbors." "What should I do? I mean, I could just refuse to grant the air rights and let the project die, but these people are going to lose money either way. She's already collected the first assessment payments, right?" "Probably. Let me look into this. Can you send me everything you found?" I emailed her the documents and spent the rest of the day trying to focus on my actual job. That evening, Rebecca called back. "Okay, I've reviewed everything. Here's the situation. Patricia has definitely breached her fiduciary duty. If the HOA found out, they could sue her personally for any damages. But here's the problem: she's also committed wire fraud. If she's used email or electronic banking to move any of this money around, that's a federal crime. So we need to involve law enforcement?" "I think you should, yes, but carefully. I'd recommend documenting everything first, then reporting it to the FBI. They handle white-collar crime. In the meantime, you should probably notify the HOA board members about what you found." "Even though Patricia's the president?" "Especially because she's the president. The other board members have a duty to act once they know about potential fraud. If they don't, they could be liable too." I thanked Rebecca and hung up, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. This had started as a property rights dispute and had turned into a criminal matter. But I couldn't just let Patricia steal from 200 families. I drafted a careful email to the other 4 board members, attaching all the documentation I'd gathered about Sunbright Solar Solutions. I explained the corporate connections, the lack of competitive bidding, and the appearance of self-dealing. I sent it late that night, blind copying Rebecca. The response came faster than I expected. At 6:30 the next morning, my phone rang. It was Gerald Morrison, the treasurer. "Mr. Whitmore, I just read your email. This is extremely serious." "I know. I'm sorry to dump this on you, but you needed to know. I've been uncomfortable with Patricia's leadership for a while, but I never suspected anything like this. We need to call an emergency board meeting. Without Patricia." "Can you do that legally?" "Given the circumstances, yes. We can vote to temporarily suspend her pending an investigation. I'm calling the other members now." By noon, I had an invitation to a board meeting that evening at Gerald's house. All 4 other board members would be there. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Gerald's home was a neat split level with family photos on every wall and the smell of coffee in the air. Tom Martinez looked like he'd aged 10 years since our last meeting. "I can't believe this. Patricia's been our neighbor for years. Our kids went to school together." "I know this is difficult," I said, "but we need to focus on protecting the HOA and its members. Has anyone confronted Patricia yet?" "No," Susan said. "We wanted to talk to you first. What do you think we should do?" "I've spoken with an attorney who specializes in HOA law. She recommends that you suspend Patricia from the board immediately and hire an independent forensic accountant to audit the HOA finances. You should also report the suspected fraud to the FBI." Linda gasped. "The FBI? Isn't that extreme? Wire fraud is a federal crime. If Patricia's used electronic banking or email in connection with this scheme, which she almost certainly has, then it falls under federal jurisdiction. The FBI is the appropriate agency." Gerald nodded slowly. "Okay, let's vote. All in favor of temporarily suspending Patricia Hendricks from her position on the board pending investigation?" 4 hands went up. It was unanimous. "Next question," Gerald continued. "Do we hire an auditor?" "Yes, Tom said firmly. "We need to know exactly where our money went." They voted on that too, another unanimous decision. Then came the hard part. "Who's going to report this to the FBI?" Susan asked. Everyone looked at me. I sighed. "I'll do it. I've already compiled most of the documentation anyway." The next morning, I called the FBI's Phoenix field office and asked to speak to someone about financial fraud. I was transferred 3 times before reaching an agent named David Park, who listened to my explanation with professional detachment. "Can you send me what you've gathered?" he asked. "Yepper." "Yes, I have corporate filings, the HOA contract, meeting minutes, and analysis of the company's background." "Good. Send it to the email address I'm about to give you. We'll review it and determine if it warrants investigation." I sent everything over and tried to go about my normal life, but word was spreading through Meadowbrook Estates. By that weekend, everyone knew that Patricia had been suspended and that some kind of financial investigation was underway. I started getting stopped by neighbors whenever I left my house. One woman, a retiree named Margaret, cornered me at the mailboxes. "Is it true Patricia was stealing from us? There's an investigation underway. I can't really comment on the details." I never liked her. She gave me a citation once because my garbage cans were visible from the street for more than an hour after pickup. An hour? Who makes up rules like that? Stories like that kept coming. It turned out Patricia had made a lot of enemies during her tenure as HOA president. She'd levied fines for minor violations, rejected reasonable requests for exterior modifications, and generally ruled the development like a petty tyrant. The solar panel project was just the culmination of years of problematic behavior. 2 weeks after I'd contacted the FBI, Agent Park called me back. "Mr. Whitmore, we'd like to meet with you and review the evidence in person. Are you available tomorrow afternoon?" I took a half-day off work and met Agent Park at a coffee shop near my office. He was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We've reviewed your materials," he said. "This appears to be a straightforward fraud scheme. Mrs. Hendricks created a fake company, awarded it a lucrative contract, and presumably planned to pocket the money. The question is whether she's actually stolen anything yet or if this was still in the planning stages. The HOA started collecting assessment payments about 3 weeks ago. How much has been collected so far?" "I don't know exactly. The forensic accountant is still working on the audit. We'll need those results. In the meantime, I want to interview Mrs. Hendricks. Do you know if she's aware of the investigation?" "She must know she's been suspended from the board, but I don't know if anyone's told her why." Agent Park nodded. "Let's keep it that way for now. I don't want her destroying evidence or moving money around." Over the next month, things moved quickly. The forensic accountant determined that Patricia had collected approximately $200,000 in initial assessment payments from homeowners. That money had been transferred to a Sunbright Solar Solutions bank account, and from there, $40,000 had been immediately transferred to Patricia's personal checking account. The rest was still sitting in the Sunbright account, presumably waiting to be stolen in smaller increments to avoid detection. The FBI executed a search warrant on Patricia's home and seized her computers, phones, and financial records. They also arrested her on charges of wire fraud and theft. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly, Meadowbrook Estates was famous for all the wrong reasons. I came home one evening to find a TV news van parked outside the community center. A reporter named Jessica Torres approached me as I walked past. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Jessica Torres from Channel 12. Can I ask you a few questions about the HOA fraud case?" "I'd rather not comment." "We've heard that you're the one who uncovered the fraud. Is that true?" "I noticed some irregularities and reported them to the appropriate authorities. That's all I can say." "But you own the air rights above all the buildings here, correct? And that's how you became aware of the solar panel scam?" I stopped walking. "Where did you hear that?" "Public records. I'm a reporter. It's my job to research these things." "Then you should know that I can't comment on an ongoing federal investigation. Please respect that." I walked away, but I knew the air rights angle would make a good story. Sure enough, that night's news broadcast led with "Man's Unusual Property Purchase Exposes Massive HOA Fraud." They dug up the recording of my air rights deed and interviewed a law professor about whether such purchases were legal. Great. The publicity brought unexpected consequences. The next morning, I received a call from a producer at a national morning show asking if I'd be willing to appear on TV to tell my story. I declined. Then, a podcast about property rights requested an interview. I declined that too. Finally, my own law firm's managing partner called me into his office. "Owen, I've been seeing your name in the news." "I know. I'm sorry if it's reflecting badly on the firm." "Actually, it's the opposite. We've had 3 new clients call asking specifically for you because they saw you on TV. They have complex property rights issues, and they want someone who thinks creatively." "Oh, that's good, I guess. Just try to keep your face out of the news if possible. We prefer to let our work speak for itself." Meanwhile, the HOA board was dealing with the fallout. They'd canceled the Sunbright contract and refunded the assessment payments to homeowners from the recovered funds. They'd also hired a new management company to review all of the HOA's procedures and implement better oversight controls. Gerald Morrison, who'd become the interim president, called me about a month after Patricia's arrest. "Owen, I wanted to give you an update. We've gotten 3 legitimate bids for solar panel installation. The prices range from $600,000 to $800,000, all significantly less than what Patricia's fake company was charging." That's good news. "The thing is, we still need your approval for the air rights. Are you willing to grant it?" I'd been thinking about this. "Yes, but I want something in return." "Here we go," Gerald said, but his tone was friendly. "What do you want?" "First, I want the HOA to implement a policy requiring competitive bidding for any contract over $50,000. Second, I want term limits for board members no one serves more than 3 consecutive years. Third, I want a rules committee made up of regular homeowners, not just board members, to review all new regulations before they're implemented." You're basically asking us to reform the entire HOA governance structure. "Yes. Patricia's fraud happened because there wasn't enough oversight. These changes will help prevent it from happening again." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "You know what? I actually agree with you. Let me present this to the rest of the board." A week later, the board voted to adopt all of my proposed reforms. In exchange, I granted them a permanent easement to use the air rights above the buildings for solar panel installation at no charge. I also agreed to allow reasonable future uses of the rooftop space for things like satellite dishes, HVAC equipment, and other standard improvements, as long as they were properly documented and approved through the new HOA procedures. The solar panels were installed that summer by a company called Arizona Renewable Energy, which had an excellent track record and came in at $650,000 for the entire project. Each homeowner's share was about $3,000, nearly half of what Patricia had tried to charge for fake solar panels that would never have been installed. Patricia's criminal case moved through the federal court system. She was initially defiant, claiming that she'd intended to complete the solar panel project and that the money in her personal account was just a management fee. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her brother-in-law, David Brennan, turned state's evidence and testified that Patricia had told him the plan was to collect as much money as possible, then dissolve Sunbright and disappear with the funds. In the end, Patricia pleaded guilty to wire fraud and was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison plus restitution of $40,000 to the HOA. David Brennan got probation for his cooperation. Michelle Torres, the third officer of Sunbright, turned out to be a fictional person whose identity Patricia had stolen. The case became something of a landmark in HOA law. Rebecca Chen, my attorney friend, wrote an article about it for a legal journal, discussing how my air rights ownership had inadvertently provided a check on HOA board overreach. Several other property owners contacted me, asking how they could do something similar, but I had to explain that the opportunity was rare. Most developments don't have financially desperate developers willing to sell off air rights separately. Life in Meadowbrook Estates gradually returned to normal, or what passed for normal. Gerald Morrison did such a good job as interim president that he was elected to a full term, along with a newly reformed board that included some younger residents who brought fresh perspectives. Susan Campbell remained as secretary and became something of an advocate for transparency, publishing detailed financial reports every quarter. The solar panels worked beautifully. My electricity bill dropped by about 60%, and the property values in the development actually increased despite the scandal. Apparently, buyers liked the idea of an HOA with strong oversight and recently reformed governance. I still own the air rights, though honestly, they've become more of a conversation piece than anything practical. Occasionally, someone wants to install something unusual on their roof and needs my approval, but I've never denied a reasonable request. The easement agreement I granted covers most normal uses, and the new HOA procedures ensure that everything is properly reviewed before it gets to me. One evening, about 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I was grilling on my back patio when Gerald stopped by with a bottle of wine. "Thought you might want to toast the end of the crazy," he said, holding up the bottle. I grabbed 2 glasses and we sat in my lawn chairs, watching the sun set over the development. The solar panels on every roof gleamed in the fading light, a visible reminder of how things had turned out. "You know," Gerald said, "I've been thinking about what you did. You could have just kept quiet about the fraud, refused to grant the air rights, and let the whole project die. Nobody would have known about Patricia's scam. That didn't seem right. People were going to lose money. Still, you took a risk. Patricia could have sued you, claimed you were the one interfering with legitimate business. She could have tried, but the evidence was pretty clear." Gerald swirled his wine. "I talked to Tom Martinez the other day. He said his son is studying property law in college now because he was so fascinated by your air rights purchase. Kid wants to be a real estate attorney." "That's great. My point is, you've had an impact beyond just catching a criminal. You've reminded people that property rights matter, that governance structures need checks and balances, and that sometimes one person paying attention can make a difference." I felt a little embarrassed by the praise. I was mostly just protecting my own interests. Maybe at first, but you didn't have to push for the governance reforms. You didn't have to help the board find legitimate contractors. You could have held the air rights hostage and demanded payment. That would have made me as bad as Patricia. Exactly, and that's why people respect you now instead of resenting you. We finished the wine as the sky turned purple and the stars came out. Later, after Gerald left, I walked around the development, something I'd started doing a few evenings a week. The neighborhood looked peaceful, with lights glowing in windows and the occasional sound of laughter from a backyard party. Near the community center, I ran into Margaret, the woman who'd complained about Patricia's garbage can rules. "Evening, Owen," she said, waving from her front porch. "Evening, Margaret. Did you hear? The Rules Committee approved my request to plant a vegetable garden in my front yard. Patricia would have had a fit, but the new board said as long as it's maintained and looks nice, it's fine." "That's great. What are you growing?" "Tomatoes, peppers, zucchini. I'm going to have more vegetables than I know what to do with by August." "Save some for me," I said, and she promised she would. These small interactions had become more common. People who'd been afraid to personalize their properties under Patricia's regime were now adding their own touches. One guy had painted his front door a cheerful blue. A family with young kids had installed a basketball hoop in their driveway. The development was becoming less sterile, more like an actual community. The following spring, I got a call from Agent Park, the FBI agent who'd handled Patricia's case. "Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to give you a heads up. Patricia Hendricks is being released early for good behavior. She's served 18 months and she'll be on supervised release for the remainder of her sentence." My stomach tightened. "Is she coming back here?" "No, part of her release conditions is that she's not allowed to return to Maricopa County. She's moving to California to live with family. But I thought you should know." "Thanks for letting me know." "I also wanted to thank you, actually. Your documentation made our case very straightforward. A lot of fraud investigations drag on for years because the evidence is scattered or unclear. You handed us everything we needed on a silver platter. I'm glad I could help. If you ever want to change careers, the FBI could use people who think like you." I laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." After hanging up, I felt an odd sense of closure. Patricia was out of prison, but out of our lives. The damage she'd done had been repaired, and the systems were now in place to prevent it from happening again. It was as close to a happy ending as a fraud case could get. That summer, the HOA organized its first annual community barbecue, something that had never happened under Patricia's leadership. Gerald spearheaded the effort, and the turnout was impressive. Nearly every household sent at least one representative. People brought food to share, kids ran around playing games, and someone set up a volleyball net in the grass near the community center. I brought my famous smoked ribs, a recipe I'd perfected over the years. Sarah, who'd been skeptical of my air rights purchase but had come around after everything that happened, made her grandmother's potato salad. We set up our contribution on one of the long folding tables and immediately got pulled into conversations with neighbors we'd only waved at before. Frank, the guy who'd been afraid to speak up against Patricia, approached me with a beer in hand. "Owen, I wanted to say thanks. I know I should have had the guts to challenge her myself, but I didn't. You did what a lot of us couldn't. You spoke up eventually. That counts. Still, I've been thinking about running for the board next year. We need people who aren't afraid to ask questions. I think you'd be good at it." As the evening wore on and the sun set, someone brought out a guitar and started playing. A few people sang along. Kids toasted marshmallows on a portable fire pit. It felt like the neighborhood had exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. Susan Campbell found me near the dessert table. "Owen, the board wanted me to ask you something. We're planning to put up a plaque at the community center commemorating the reforms we implemented. We'd like to mention your role in making them happen." "That's really not necessary." "We think it is. You used your property rights to protect the community. That's worth recognizing." I thought about it. "Okay, but can you keep it simple? Just something like, these reforms were implemented to ensure transparency and accountability in community governance." "No need to name names," Susan smiled. "You really don't like being the center of attention, do you?" "Not particularly. We'll keep it tasteful." The plaque went up a month later, a small bronze rectangle mounted near the community center entrance. It didn't mention me by name, just acknowledged that the reforms had been prompted by vigilant community members who recognized the need for change. That felt right. My practice continued to grow, fueled in part by the publicity from the case. I started specializing in property rights disputes, particularly complex ones involving air rights, mineral rights, and easements. It turned out there was a real need for attorneys who understood these niche areas. One case involved a rancher whose property had been bisected by a new highway, leaving him with land on both sides, but no legal way to move his cattle across the road. I negotiated an easement with the state transportation department that included an underpass designed for livestock. Another case involved a downtown building owner who discovered that a neighboring property owned the light and air rights that would be blocked by his planned addition. I helped broker a purchase agreement that satisfied both parties. Each case reinforced something I'd learned from my own experience. Property rights are complex, often counterintuitive, and absolutely crucial to a functioning society. When they're respected and clearly defined, people can plan, invest, and build. When they're ignored or violated, conflict and chaos result. 2 years after Patricia's arrest, I was invited to speak at a property law conference in San Diego. The topic was creative use of property rights in modern development. I almost declined, still uncomfortable with public speaking, but Rebecca Chen convinced me it was a good opportunity to share what I'd learned. The presentation went better than expected. I walked through the Meadowbrook Estates case, explaining how the air rights purchase had worked, how I'd discovered the fraud, and what lessons could be drawn for other property owners and HOA members. The audience of attorneys, developers, and property managers asked thoughtful questions, and several people approached me afterward to discuss similar situations they'd encountered. One developer from Colorado was particularly interested. "I've got a mixed-use project where I retained air rights specifically to prevent future owners from claiming I'm blocking their views or light, but I never thought about using them as leverage for better governance. That's fascinating." "Just be careful," I said. "Property rights are tools, not weapons. Use them to protect legitimate interests, not to extract unreasonable concessions." "Noted. That's wise." Flying home from San Diego, I reflected on how much had changed since that Tuesday evening when I'd found Patricia's letter about solar panels. I'd gone from being an anonymous homeowner to something of a minor celebrity in property law circles. Meadowbrook Estates had gone from a dysfunctional HOA to a model of transparent governance, and Patricia had gone from a petty tyrant to a convicted felon. But the most important change was subtler. The people in my community had learned that they had power, that they could question authority, and that systems could be reformed. That knowledge wouldn't fade even after the drama of Patricia's case became a distant memory. When I got home, there was a letter waiting for me from the new HOA board. Inside was a formal thank you note and a small gift card to a local restaurant. The note was signed by all 5 board members and simply said, "For reminding us that property rights come with responsibilities and the communities thrive when people care enough to pay attention." I stuck the note on my refrigerator, where it remained for years. Life continued. Sarah and I talked about starting a family, though we hadn't made any concrete decisions yet. My parents, who lived in Tucson, visited more often now that I had an interesting story to tell them about suburban life. My dad, who'd been a civil engineer, was particularly fascinated by the air rights concept and spent hours drawing diagrams of how vertical property ownership could work in different contexts. The solar panels kept generating electricity, saving everyone money and reducing the development's carbon footprint. The HOA board continued to function well, with regular elections and healthy turnover. The Rules Committee, which now included representatives from across the community, reviewed and reformed many of Patricia's more absurd regulations. The garbage can visibility requirement was eliminated. The approved paint color list was expanded. People could park their cars on their own driveways overnight without fear of citation. Small changes, but they added up to a better quality of life. 3 years after the initial confrontation with Patricia, I received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was hesitant, uncertain. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Patricia Hendricks." I almost hung up, but curiosity stopped me. "What do you want, Patricia?" "I wanted to apologize. I know it's too late to undo what I did, but I've been working with a therapist, and part of my recovery is making amends to the people I hurt." "You hurt a lot of people." "I know. I've sent letters to the entire HOA community, but I wanted to call you specifically because you're the one who stopped me. If you hadn't noticed the air rights issue, I would have stolen a lot more money before anyone caught on." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry at her for what she'd tried to do. Another part recognized that she was trying to take responsibility. "Why did you do it?" I asked. She sighed. "Money problems. My husband lost his job, we had debt, and I convinced myself that I deserved compensation for all the work I did for the HOA. It was volunteer work, no salary. And people were so ungrateful, always complaining, never acknowledging the effort. I started thinking I should get something out of it." "So you decided to steal from your neighbors?" "I know how it sounds. I'm not making excuses. I was wrong, and I destroyed my reputation, my freedom, my relationships. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry." "Okay. I appreciate you calling." "That's it? You're not going to yell at me or tell me what a terrible person I am?" "Would that help?" "No, I guess not." "Then we're done here. Good luck with your recovery, Patricia." I hung up feeling oddly empty. There was no satisfaction in her apology, no sense of vindication. She'd done wrong, been punished, and was trying to move forward. That was probably the best outcome available given the circumstances. That evening, I told Sarah about the call. We were sitting on our patio, the same spot where Gerald and I had shared wine years earlier. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. "I don't know. Conflicted, I guess. I'm glad she's taking responsibility, but it doesn't change what happened." "Do you forgive her?" "I'm not sure I need to. She didn't wrong me personally. She wronged the community. That's not really mine to forgive." Sarah nodded. "That's probably healthy." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barked somewhere. Kids laughed in a nearby yard. The hum of air conditioners mixed with the chirping of crickets. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said. "You bought those air rights on a whim, basically. $30,000 for something intangible that most people would consider worthless, and it ended up mattering." "Yeah, it's weird how things work out. Makes you wonder what other seemingly useless things might turn out to be important." "I'm not buying any more abstract property rights, if that's what you're suggesting." She laughed. "I wouldn't dream of stopping you." The following year brought more changes. Gerald Morrison decided not to run for another term as HOA president, feeling that he'd accomplished what he'd set out to do. Frank, the guy who'd been too afraid to challenge Patricia, ran and won. His platform was simple: keep the reforms working, maintain transparency, And remember that the HOA exists to serve the community, not the other way around. Under Frank's leadership, the HOA implemented a few more innovations. They created a community garden where residents could rent small plots to grow vegetables. They organized monthly neighborhood watch meetings that also served as social gatherings. They even started a small newsletter, written and edited by volunteers, that highlighted community achievements and kept everyone informed about upcoming decisions. My role gradually shifted from active participant to interested observer. I attended HOA meetings when something important was on the agenda, but I no longer needed to monitor every decision. The systems were working. The checks and balances held. People were paying attention. 5 years after I'd bought the air rights, a young couple moved into the townhouse next to mine. Their names were Nathan and Nicole, and they had a toddler son who loved to play in their small backyard. One Saturday morning, Nathan knocked on my door. "Hey, Owen, I'm Nathan from next door. I wanted to ask you about something I found in the property records." "Sure, what's up?" "It says you own the air rights above my building. What does that mean exactly?" I smiled. "Come on in. This might take a while to explain." I made coffee and told him the whole story, from buying the air rights to discovering Patricia's fraud to the governance reforms that followed. Nathan listened with increasing amazement. "That's incredible. So you're like a local legend?" "I don't know about that. I just noticed something wrong and spoke up." "Still, that took guts, and it sounds like it worked out well for everyone." "Mostly, yeah. Why were you looking at the property records?" "Oh, I'm a mechanical engineer. I like to understand how things work, including property ownership. When I saw the air rights notation, I got curious." "Well, you don't need to worry about it. The easement agreement covers all normal uses. Unless you're planning to build a skyscraper on your roof, you're fine." Nathan laughed. "No skyscrapers, but it's cool to know the history. Makes me feel like I'm part of something interesting." That conversation stuck with me. The Meadowbrook Estate story had become part of the community's identity, a shared narrative that new residents learned and old residents retold. It was a reminder that governance mattered, that individual action could make a difference, and that property rights, while sometimes arcane, served important purposes. Years continued to pass. Sarah and I had our first child, a daughter we named Emma. The HOA board sent us a congratulations card and a gift certificate for baby supplies. Margaret from down the street brought over a casserole and offered to babysit any time we needed help. The community that had once been held together by fear and rigid rules now functioned through genuine neighborly connections. Emma grew up playing with the other kids in the development, attending the annual HOA barbecues and learning to ride her bike on the quiet streets. She had no idea that her father had once been at the center of a legal and criminal drama that had reshaped the entire community. To her, Meadowbrook Estates was just home, a safe and friendly place where people looked out for each other. One evening when Emma was about 7 years old, she came home from a playdate with questions. "Daddy, Sophie's mom said you're famous. Are you famous?" I exchanged a glance with Sarah, who suppressed a smile. "Not really, sweetie. I helped solve a problem in our neighborhood a long time ago." "What kind of problem?" "A grown-up problem about money and rules." "Did you get in trouble?" "No, I helped stop someone else who was doing something wrong." "Like a superhero?" "More like a lawyer who paid attention." She seemed satisfied with that answer and ran off to play with her toys. Sarah leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Nah, a superhero lawyer who pays attention. I like it." "Please don't encourage her. She'll tell everyone at school." "Would that be so bad?" "I'd prefer to remain a mysterious figure of mild local interest." Sarah laughed. "Too late for that." Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that the air rights purchase had been one of those random decisions that ended up shaping the trajectory of multiple lives. If I hadn't bought them, Patricia's fraud might have succeeded. The HOA would have paid over $1 million for solar panels that never existed. Families would have lost money. The community would have remained under dysfunctional leadership. Or maybe someone else would have noticed something wrong. Maybe the fraud would have collapsed on its own. It's impossible to know how things might have gone differently. What I did know was that paying attention mattered. Asking questions mattered. Being willing to stand up when something seemed wrong mattered. These weren't superhero actions. They were basic civic responsibilities that Too many people abdicated. The air rights themselves, the legal mechanism that had started everything, remained mine. Occasionally, someone would ask if I'd ever sell them back to the individual homeowners, but I always declined. Not because I wanted to maintain control, but because their value wasn't monetary. They were a reminder, a symbol, a conversation piece that kept alive the story of what had happened and why it mattered. 10 years after buying the air rights, the local bar association asked me to write an article about the case for their journal. I spent several weekends drafting and revising, trying to capture not just the legal mechanics, but the human elements. The article was titled, "When Property Rights Become Community Guardianship, a Case Study in HOA Reform." The response was overwhelming. I received emails from attorneys across the country, HOA board members seeking advice, and property owners who'd encountered similar situations. Some wanted to replicate what I'd done. Others just wanted to share their own stories of HOA dysfunction and reform. One email came from a woman in Florida who discovered that her HOA president was embezzling funds through fake landscaping contracts. She'd reported it to the board, but they dismissed her concerns. Reading about my experience had given her the courage to go directly to law enforcement, and an investigation was now underway. "Your story reminded me that one person can make a difference," she wrote. "Thank you for speaking up when it would have been easier to stay silent." I printed that email and kept it in my office. On difficult days, when legal work felt tedious or pointless, I'd read it and remember why property rights mattered, why governance structures needed protection, and why individual action could ripple outward in unexpected ways. The Meadowbrook estate story had become larger than me, larger than Patricia's fraud, larger even than the HOA reforms. It had become a parable about civic engagement, about the importance of oversight, about the balance between individual rights and community responsibilities. And it all started with a property rights technicality that most people would have considered irrelevant. As I write this now, sitting in my home office while Emma does homework in the next room and Sarah prepares dinner in the kitchen, I can look out my window and see the solar panels on my neighbors' roofs. They're generating clean electricity, saving money, and serving as a daily reminder of what this community went through and what it became. The air rights that I own, that strange and abstract property interest, continue to exist somewhere in the legal ether above these buildings. They probably won't ever matter again in any practical sense. The easement I granted covers any foreseeable use, but they remain on the deed, recorded in the county records, available for anyone curious enough to look. And maybe that's their real value. They're a breadcrumb trail, leading anyone who follows it to a story about how communities work, how they fail, and how they can be fixed. They're evidence that the seemingly arcane details of property law aren't just academic exercises, but can have real-world consequences for real people. Tomorrow, the HOA board is voting on whether to install electric vehicle charging stations in the community parking areas. It's a straightforward decision that will probably pass unanimously. The board has gotten competitive bids, reviewed the proposals transparently, and solicited input from the community. It's exactly how the process should work. I won't attend the meeting. I don't need to anymore. The systems are functioning. The culture has changed. The community has learned to govern itself responsibly. But I'll keep those air rights, that odd property interest that started everything. Not as leverage or control, but as a reminder that sometimes the things that seem useless or strange can turn out to matter more than anyone expected. And if another Patricia Hendricks ever shows up, trying to exploit this community, well, I'll still be here, still paying attention, still ready to ask uncomfortable questions. Because that's what ownership means, not just the right to use or profit from property, but the responsibility to protect it and the community it's part of. That's the lesson I learned from owning the air above Meadowbrook Estates, and it's one I'll carry with me long after these buildings crumble, and someone else's property rights become relevant. The sun is setting now, casting golden light through my window. Emma just came in to show me her completed math homework. Sarah called, "The dinner is ready." Life is good, normal, peaceful. And somewhere in a county records database, a notation exists saying that I, Owen Whitmore, own the air rights above 217 properties in Meadowbrook Estates, Phoenix, Arizona. It's the most valuable $30,000 I ever spent.